Inquisition and were quite horrible to pagans and things, and Cathars. Now the Cathars also quite like Mary Magdalene, and there are many teachings that the Cathars had. I'm still trying to uncover the depth of all that, but and that's why I've run this Mary Magdalene Studies Association conferences here at Bétet in the middle of France, and also in the Pyrenees, which was the Cathar country. So there's lots of mysteries about Mary Magdalene and Jesus and their Gnostic teachings, which I hope will come out more. And I'm delighted to say that association is flourishing. If we get out of lockdown, there will be a conference here on July the 22nd for the Mary Magdalene Study Association, that's her day, her saint's day. She's now been finally declared a saint of the church. So I think, and there's some great theologians who've been writing about her and realising her importance, because this suppression of the feminine side of Christianity is part of the imbalance. It's why the church, in its official form, became such a sort of a nest of vipers all contending for power, typical boys' games, and leading armies and chasing each other and chopping each other's heads off. And even the Protestants, when they got going, they were almost as bad. Calvin and Luther, they were just fanatics too. The real church, the Gnostic inner wisdom church, just carried on quietly doing its thing, and it bubbled up into history at different times, in the Rosicrucian movement, in the Pan-Sophist movement, in the Masonic traditions of esoteric wisdom, and it's kept going. People like Jacob Boehme and then Hegel. These were, to me, the true wisdom teachers of that Gnostic origin of actual Christianity. This is what the thing's supposed to be about. So that's that's something else I've been doing, and I'm I think my formula for humanity getting out of our dark ages, we've been living through dark ages, is truth, satya, at all levels, healing, whereby we can heal each other and ourselves of we've all been through abuse, basically, the abuse of a system that is premised on lies and deceit. Not necessarily even consciously. I mean, people that work in like schools that are premised on competitive knowledge battles and partiality of information disclosure. So if you go to a normal school, you don't get actual education. You get sort of social control mechanisms that are thrown at you, and disciplinarian systems whereby your mind is forced to think along certain paths. And if you fail, then you get stuck in detentions or borstal. I mean, that's a social control mechanism. It's called education, as Ivan Ilyich used to point out, who I met. Whereas what I'm into is genuine, actual soul transformation, education in the Socratic sense, of spiritual initiation and rebirth. That was why Christ was coming to our initiatory mystery school. That's, now to me, the paradox and tragedy is that's what Christianity ought to be about. That's the real McCoy I'm talking about. That's what Christ was trying to teach. And I think that's why he was such a threat to the system that unfortunately killed him, or tried to, in the conventional realists of Jerusalem who were running their temple as a kind of money-making scam, with resurrection pigeons, being slaughtered and sacrificed. And they were colluding with the Roman Imperium, which was pretty nasty and hard-edged. The Romans had already slaughtered Gaul, massacred the Druids, were about to conquer Britain and do the same. And the Roman intellectuals had colluded with the armed, oppression of these military rulers like Caesar, who they were clever but bad, and a succession of them. Tiberius, slightly, wicked, then Nero, Caligula, Claudius, and so on. Claudius was borderline goodish, but the rest were absolutely some of the most bestial rulers of all history. That's what Jesus was up against. And that's what the Jews were colluding with. Eventually they realised they were making a mistake and did a rebellion against them. But, it was too late and they were massacred and wiped out. Well, I think what I'm saying, through truth, through healing, we need to develop a way of reconciling all this. So take the wisdom teachings of humanity, take the Kabbalah, esoteric Christian Gnosticism, the Hermetic wisdoms of Egypt, the American Indian wisdom of the Oklahoma, tribes and all the others that's now coming back, and of the Peruvian Andes and all the rest of them, and the Druid traditions of the Celtic world. Let's put all our best foot forward and make a reconciliation plan, a treaty, a peace treaty. And that's why I've written this Interfaith peace treaty. It's the only one that's ever been done. I suppose I've done it because it's been my duty. It's my duty this life. It's my dharma to present that to you and to humanity. Please sign it. Read the text. Interfaith peace treaty. It's got its own website. Think about it at a deep level and sign it. And it's in my little book of peace declarations in one of the 3 volumes. I want to talk also about another consequence of what I've been doing, which goes back to that past life experience. I mean, this all grows out of that. You see, I think each of us in our live streams, we take stuff that's unfinished in one life, we take it on to another. That's why we have another life, and I chose to come back because I want to finish the teachings. I want to carry on with them. There's more to be done on this planet, and that's why when I was 19, I took a Bodhisattva Vow. I'm going to keep at this till we all reach planetary enlightenment, and that to me is the end of lockdown. So what I've done recently, some of you know this, is I've coined for the first time this idea of peace magic. Right, so this is a book called Magical Peacemaking, and it's a how-to manual. I mean, it's not difficult it's not long, but it's intense in its proposals and its implications, and it's 51 lessons that you should read every week. So it takes a whole year, 52 weeks, to look through it, and then to do the practices. This is like a very advanced tantric, druidical, Gnostic, Hermetic, universalist formula for magical peacemaking. You see, so many people are interested in magic now on the planet, and millions are interested in peace, but nobody's put the two together. This is the first and only book you can find about the magic of peacemaking, and to me it is the most important magic. It's the missing magic that and what sparked this is many years of studying peace studies and teaching it, many years of being interested in esoteric stuff, and probably many lifetimes. But then feeling, well, why are these discourses going on in separate rooms of the Palace of Wisdom? As Christ said, my Father's mansion has many rooms, many mansions, but there are conversations differently going on in different rooms. It's time to bring them together into the Grand Central Hall. When I was in the Theosophical Society headquarters in Adyar, lovely place, I've been several times, they have a sort of central hall where they have lectures and things. Time to bring all the wisdom workers together into the central hall and talk about the magic of peace. Because I can assure you the warriors are talking about magical war making. When I did part of my degree, I studied at, as you know, probably the University of London for my degree. And I used to go to the War Studies Department at King's College, which is run by Lawrence Freedman and his cronies. And they're all into war studies. And there's a huge industry of people writing about war. And they're all studying the occult side of war. And most warriors, they have an occult training school. If you want to be a warrior in the samurai tradition in Japan, you learn to be a great warrior. And it involves spiritual work, discipline, connected to the martial arts. The same in African tribes. To be a warrior is a great discipline. The same in the Celtic Arthurian legends. To be a knight was, it's a lifetime of work to be a really good warrior, like Lancelot or something. And the same in the chivalry schools of the Holy Roman Emperor and France. So, and the same in the 20th century. Now, what I'm saying is I'm not saying that these warriors are all evil or wrong. I'm saying it's time to up their own training and their own initiation. These warriors now need retraining, reschooling in a new art, which is the art of magical peacemaking. So applying the skills they've learned as warriors, which is truth, courage, honour, the samurai never fights if they can avoid it. They're about protecting the innocent, the weak. The true knight in the Arthurian legends doesn't just go off fighting for the sake of it. You fight to protect the defenceless, the woman, the child, the poor. And that's what a knight is. A knight is someone who's sworn to protect the innocent. Well, and that's what the Templars were for, and the other great chivalric orders. So what I'm saying is that's great. Let's revive that, but now we put them to the work of peace only. What we need is enough true warriors to come forward to do peace work, magical peacemaking. Unfortunately, there are loads of rogues around who are still doing warrior work and still think that the best game is to defeat the enemy. That was why I was so against Brexit, because it was run by warrior types like Steve Bannon, who was a kind of warrior type. They all read Julius Evola, who was a fascist Italian intellectual who said warriors are the best. And they invented, with Chris Wiley and others helping, the weaponization of information and data transformation. So they're now doing information war. And it's interesting, Steve Bannon invented the world of Warcraft as a big worldwide mega industry and made his money at it by making all the little adolescent kids become warriors in their living rooms for days on end, and nights and nights and nights. So he's weaponized the world. So Brexit is the next best thing. It's like another little game he can play. These people don't realize why peace is important. Their training is lacking. Unfortunately, American esoteric peace trainers often are fighting a losing battle. Kennedy, one of the great presidents for peace, was assassinated by a warrior team, a secret, covered, sinister warrior team who took him down. Well, I'm on the peace team that's, carrying on with the vision that Kennedy had. And my vision for the Pentagon, the only way to discipline that crowd, who really ought to know better, these silly warriors, is build a nonagon on the top of the Pentagon. This came to me as a vision at Leonardo da Vinci's gravesite at Amboise, and Leonardo was a great visionary of peace, a peace magician who used art, music, but he had to work for the Borgias because they were his patrons. And nowadays, many, many creative intellectuals in America have to work for the Pentagon, inventing weaponization of everything that moves. They'll weaponize it. No, that's not good enough. We need a nonagon on the top floor of the Pentagon to announce to the world America is now actually a peaceful nation. Sorry we got it wrong. We've read Thomas's book on magical peacemaking. We've heard his talks. We are now going to fund equally the nonagon, which can be built easily, and the Pentagon. The Pentagon's old school, that's last century, right? That sends out weapons and everything. Nonagon does peace. It organizes that America has no enemies, doesn't need standing armies, can finally live up to the terms of the Declaration of Independence, and, honor everybody's right to independence. The American energy has been hijacked by the dark forces that run the Pentagon and that organized 9/11. I suspend judgment, but probably based on my research, which you can read my book, which, it's very weird that David Icke did a 2-volume book on 9/11 and the history thereof, and I was doing exactly the same. So, we must be opposites to some extent. I haven't come to the same conclusions as David Icke, I should say. But he deserves to be heard, and I will look at his research. He can look at mine. But what we do agree on is there was something not right about the conventional narrative about 9/11. It was a warrior act that was then subverted and transformed by another bunch of warriors in the shadows. Peace magic is about shining a light on all that. It's about saying, enough warriors, go home, go to bed, re-educate yourselves, become a peace magician, which is what a peace druid does. That's why I'm the peace druid of Europe, right? That's my duty here. Right, I want to share the next thing, which is quite important. I've been working on this little book of peace declarations, as you may know, and I've published 2 volumes, and I'm working on the 3rd volume. And this volume is proving fascinating. I'm doing this research because I love study, as you know, and I'm just sharing what I find. I think this is quite important. These peace declarations, there's about 80 I've put in so far. These are the fundamental texts we have to hold on to as to how we're going to find peace on this planet. If we're going to do peace magic, we need to know what peace is. So, for instance, did you know that the Treaty of Westphalia, which was an incredibly important treaty of peace in Europe that ended the 30 Years' War in 1648, it created the modern world system, really, the modern state system, and was incredibly significant. Well, it starts its declaration, if I can just find the text, just bear with me a second. I want to read the opening paragraph because it's so amazing, really. Let me see if I can find it here. No, I'm not searching the footnotes, I'm searching the text. No wonder it won't find it. Right, here we are. Okay, this is called the Treaty of Westphalia, peace treaty between the Holy Roman Emperor and the King of France and their respective allies. 24th day of October, 1648. Now, I just want to say that this ended the 30 Years' War, which was the most horrendous war that had ever happened in the history of the world up to then, quote unquote, but certainly in the history of Europe. And for 30 years, these Protestants and Catholics had been fighting each other, but brutally and cruelly, and doing massacres. And Germany was reduced, its population went down by about 2/3, and people were starving, people were sacking towns and raping everyone and killing everyone. It had reduced humanity to a level of bestiality. This is why I don't like war. I mean, I've nothing against the noble warrior who's protecting the weak and the innocent, but this is just the perversion of that instinct when it becomes a predatory, violence just for the sake of it. And that's why I was against the invasion of Iraq, utterly 100% 2003, why I marched against it, and why I was against all the wars. I mean, if only they'd listened to me earlier about peace magic, maybe they wouldn't have happened so much. But anyway, this wonderful treaty, it starts, listen. In the name of the most holy and individual Trinity, be it known to all, and every one whom it may concern, or to whom in any manner it may belong, that for many years past, discords and civil divisions being stirred up in the Roman Empire, which increased to such a degree that not only all Germany, but also the neighbouring kingdoms, and France particularly, have been involved in the disorders of a long and cruel war. And in the first place, between the most serene and most puissant prince and lord, Ferdinand II of famous memory, elected Roman Emperor, always august, King of Germany, Hungary, Bohemia, Dalmatia, Croatia, Slavonia, Archduke of Austria, Duke of Burgundy, Brabant, Styria, Carinthia, Carniola, Marquis of Moravia, Duke of Luxembourg, and so on and so on. It gives all his kind of lands. And then it goes on to talk about the French king, the most puissant Prince Louis XIII, most Christian King of France and Navarre, with all his allies and adherents on the other side. And so on and so on. But what I find so moving is that this is dedicated to the Trinity. That's invoked to supervise and safeguard. Because after all, these were Christians fighting each other, both Catholic and Protestant. Here they were doing mass slaughters. But no, the Trinity now comes in and brings peace. This peace treaty was incredibly important because it brought peace at the end of the 30 Years' War. And it set up the modern state system, which is you can have your state, you can be Protestant, you can have yours, you can be Catholic. It's not an excuse to fight each other. And so that's one of the many things I put in here. And I'm hoping that people will reread these treaties, some of which are just so important but never read, never studied. Now, I put another treaty in here, or a peace encyclical, which is called Pacem in Terris. And this was issued in 1963 by the Pope, who was called John the 23rd. And its full title is The Encyclical of Pope John the 23rd on Establishing Universal Peace in Truth, Justice, Charity and Liberty. And it begins as follows. To our venerable brethren, blah, 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 throughout the entire world, to all men and women of goodwill, peace on earth, which man throughout the ages has so longed for and sought after, can never be established, never guaranteed, except by the diligent observance of the divinely established order. That a marvellous order predominates in the world of living beings and in the forces of nature is the plain lesson which the progress of modern research and the discoveries of technology teach us. And it is part of the greatness of man that he can appreciate that order and devise the means for harnessing those forces for his own benefit. Now it goes on, and then it talks about order in human beings. So just as the divine order is in nature, so in human nature. And that's when we are living in harmony and justly with each other. When we speak truth, we're kind, we observe, social etiquettes of love and affection. However, it goes on to say, and yet there is a disunity among individuals and among nations, which is in striking contrast to the perfect order of the universe. One would think that the relationships that bind men together could only be governed by force. But this world's creator has stamped man's innermost being with an order revealed to man by his conscience. And his conscience insists on his preserving it. Men show the work of the law written in their hearts. Their conscience bears witness to them. And how could it be otherwise? All created being reflects the infinite wisdom of God. It reflects it all the more clearly the higher it stands in the scales of perfection. This was an absolute masterpiece of a text written by a philosopher pope, witness a philosopher king, who was probably the greatest pope, I think, of modern times. Even more so, I think, than John Paul II, who I met in the Vatican at a peace conference in '94. This one died, sadly, soon after writing this document. And there's a marvellous section about truth, which I want to share. It talks about God and the moral order, the equality of man, appeal to conscience. And he says the following. In this connection, we should draw the attention of our own sons to the fact that the common good is something which affects the needs of the whole man, body and soul. That, then, is the sort of good which rulers of states must take suitable measures to ensure. They must respect the hierarchy of values and aim at achieving the spiritual as well as the material prosperity of their subjects. What? Spiritual well-being as well as material prosperity? I mean, this is in 1963, this document. Now, this is what Peace Magic is saying, and it's coming here in this encyclical from a pope who was then made into a saint. John the 23rd is a recognised saint nowadays. Pope Francis has so declared it, and he was being canonised. And then so anyway, it's a mine of beautiful nuggets, diamonds of insight. Now, here's the thing, and this is, don't forget, I'm reading this out at the time of coronavirus when nations are afraid of each other and nobody tells the truth. We don't know which nation is telling the truth. You know, the officials in the White House don't even know who's telling the truth among all the officials, nor do they in Boris Johnson's cabinet. They're all lying, and they've lied so often and so long they can't remember what truth looks like. You know, they don't know whether they're locking down, freeing up, blah, blah, blah. At least Keir Starmer seems to know the difference between truth and lies. This is it. In truth, the first point to be settled is that mutual ties between states must be governed by truth. Truth calls for the elimination of every trace of racial discrimination and the consequent recognition of the inviolable principle that all states are by nature equal in dignity. Each of them accordingly has the right to exist, to develop, and to possess the necessary means and accept a primary responsibility for its own development. Each is also legitimately entitled to its good name and to the respect which it is due. I'm thinking as I read this of, say, Venezuela, America trashing the good name of Venezuela, doing subversive covert operations to try and subvert its ruler, democratically elected, and using the world's media as a propaganda tool to kind of justify that. I'm thinking of the fact of the Palestinians still denied their state. This was issued in 1963 when Kennedy was trying to make peace between Israel and Palestine happen. And had he not been assassinated, he would have succeeded. Here we are, like, so many years later, nearly 60 years later, and still there is not truth between the nations. As we know from experience, men frequently differ widely in knowledge, virtue, intelligence, and wealth. But that is no valid argument in favour of a system whereby those who are in a position of superiority impose their will arbitrarily on others. On the contrary, such men have a greater share in the common responsibility to help others to reach perfection by their mutual efforts. So again, I look at the world situation today and I see the rich, the very rich, oppressing the poor, the vast majority of people, and the rich nations like Britain and America and so on, oppressing the poor. And I think of the Saudi regime that's been oppressing the poor people in Yemen and people because they're Shia or whatever. The rich are oppressing the poor all over the place. And this document is saying, look, oi, stop it, because we're all equal in the eyes of God. So too, on the international level, some nations may have attained to a superior degree of scientific, cultural, and economic development, but that does not entitle them to exert unjust political domination over other nations. It means that they have to make a greater contribution to the common cause of social progress. I mean, for God's sake, this is amazing stuff. Read this declaration. This is Pacem in Terris, 1963. If the world read this document and did it, wars would end. Humanity would be back on the road of proper truth. And sadly, ever since Kennedy was shot, we've taken a huge diversion around this idea that rich nations are entitled to bully poor nations, and that rich people are entitled to bully poor people. Christ said the opposite. He said, it's easier for a really rich person to get into the kingdom of heaven than a camel to go through a needle. he was prone to verbal exaggeration. It was his Aramaic way of being. And, so his current day disciple, which is the Pope, is putting it very neatly. And he goes on to make the following observation. The fact is that no one can, by nature, be superior to his fellows, since all men are equally noble in natural dignity. And consequently, there are no differences at all between political communities from the point of view of natural dignity. Each state is like a body, the members of which are human beings. And as we know from experience, nations can be highly sensitive in matters in any way touching their dignity and honour, with very good reason. And then this is crucial, the next one. Truth further demands, and I mean, don't you think this is amazing? Here we have an international diplomatic encyclical talking about truth in international relations. And meanwhile, we're dying as a world with lies, propaganda on all fronts. Now the Pope goes on to address that. John the 23rd was a saint, right? Truth further demands an attitude of unruffled impartiality in the use of the many aids to the promotion and spread of mutual understanding between nations, which modern scientific progress has made available. This does not mean that people should be prevented from drawing particular attention to the virtues of their own way of life, but it does mean the utter rejection of ways of disseminating information which violate the principles of truth and justice and injure the reputation of another nation. So this section on truth, which I commend to your reading, is so prescient. It's like prophetic speaking, because here we live in an age of the internet. We have tremendous ability to communicate. We can all talk to each other, but so few people are actually telling the truth, and so many people are doing fake propaganda type stuff, and that's what the Pope is there warning about. We will never get peace on earth till we get truth. Well, I 100% agree, and that's why I've been sharing candidly in this talk. And that's why I also, as some of you that follow my work know, wrote to the papacy of Francis about the matter of the COVID virus, COVID-19, because there's so much confusion over where it came from. Is it man-made? Is it artificial? Is it just like bats swanning around in caves in China and bit the wrong pangolin, which then was eaten by the wrong person, and so on. So what I proposed to the Pope, and I wrote a formal letter, is that he has this thing called the Papal Academic Scientific Commission, which has all the top scientists who are Catholics in the world, and many of the greatest scientists are Roman Catholic, actually, in every different country, here in France, in Germany, Italy, all over the world, in Britain and so on. Because many scientists know enough to know that science doesn't have all the answers, so they still believe in a moral order behind the universe, and some of the greatest scientists like Newton and so on were deeply religious and spiritual. So anyway, I've suggested to the Pope that he should organise a papal commission of inquiry into coronavirus to clear this up. Where's it come from? And to try and work with other scientists, the International Council of Scientists, to come up with a cure, obviously. But we also want to know the etiology. So I've written suggesting that, and let's hope. And then, very interestingly, a few days later, I saw that the Pope has set up a commission into coronavirus, but it's more about like how can the Church survive its lockdown rules. What can you do about having mass and all that? It's much more